I have lived through enough downturns to know that most people misunderstand what a recession really is. They think it is an event, a headline, a bad year, a period when the market turns red, the news gets louder, and life suddenly becomes harder for reasons that seem to arrive from nowhere. That is not how I have ever experienced it. A recession is not mainly something that happens to you. It is something that reveals you. It reveals whether the life you built was real or rented. It reveals whether your comfort was funded by margin or by illusion. It reveals whether your decisions were designed for applause during good times or resilience during bad ones. And most of all, it reveals whether you were preparing while everyone else was performing. That is the part most people never understand until they are already in pain. They imagine the wealth gap opens during a recession. It usually does not. The wealth gap is built in the quiet months and years before the recession arrives, when one person is still enlarging his lifestyle because the paycheck feels solid, and another is quietly enlarging his options because he understands that conditions always change. That is the difference. The first man feels successful, the second man becomes powerful. I want you to sit with that distinction because it explains almost everything I have learned through a lifetime of crises. I have been through 12 recessions, 12, and every single one left me wealthier on the other side. Not because I am lucky in some supernatural way, not because I received secret information from some hidden room full of wise men in dark suits, not because I enjoy panic or somehow become smarter only when everyone else is afraid. I came out wealthier because I learned a long time ago that a recession does not reward the person who reacts fastest once the damage is visible. It rewards the person who prepared earliest while the damage was still invisible. That is what I want to give you here. Not a prediction, not a television opinion. Not a tidy little emergency checklist that flatters you for 3 days and then disappears into the same pile as every other piece of anxious advice. I want to give you a framework strong enough that if 2026 turns into the kind of year many people fear it may become, you do not behave like the crowd, because the crowd in recessions is almost always too late. It looks late, it thinks late, it sells late, it panics late, it learns the lesson late, and by the time the lesson becomes socially acceptable to repeat, the real opportunity is already being taken by people who had the courage to prepare before it felt necessary. The first thing you must understand is this: a recession is not just a bad economy, it is a giant sorting machine. It sorts the liquid from the overextended, it sorts the patient from the theatrical, it sorts the family that built margin from the family that financed normal life with optimism. It sorts the person who knows what his money is for from the person who only knows how to spend it when it arrives. That sorting is brutal, but it is also extremely honest. When money is easy, almost everyone can look competent. That is one of the reasons long expansions make societies stupid. Cheap credit hides weak judgment. Rising asset prices hide poor discipline. Stable employment hides structural dependence. A bull market can make foolish people feel strategic and undisciplined people feel rich. Then the weather changes, and suddenly every hidden weakness starts announcing itself. That is when the sorting begins. People ask me all the time how I stayed calm in periods like 2008 or during other ugly stretches when perfectly intelligent people around me were becoming more emotional by the hour. The answer is not temperament alone. It is architecture. I had already arranged my life and my capital in a way that allowed calm to be useful. That is what most people miss. Calm is not merely a personality trait. Calm is often a financial condition. If a man has no cash, too much debt, a lifestyle that requires his exact income to continue uninterrupted, and a mind trained by noise instead of by judgment, calm is very hard to access when the world starts shaking. He may be a decent man. He may be a hard-working woman. He may be sincere, smart, and morally admirable. None of that changes the arithmetic. Without room, the mind loses options. Without options, fear takes over. And fear is one of the most expensive advisors in all of finance. So when people say they want to prepare for recession, I do not begin with stocks. I do not begin with politics. I do not begin with forecasts. I begin with structure, because recessions are survived structurally long before they are survived emotionally. There are 5 ideas underneath everything I have ever done well in downturns. They are not fashionable. They are not sexy. They do not require a finance degree. And they do not require you to become some hyperactive amateur economist staring at every release and every futures market trying to guess what will happen next Tuesday. But they do require honesty. That is the hard part. The first is liquidity. This is where the story always begins, because it is where freedom begins. Most people think cash is idle. That is what booms teach them. They see a person holding cash and think he lacks imagination. They assume he does not know what to do with his money, or that he is too timid to commit, or that he is waiting because he lacks conviction. That is how easy money periods train the public to think. I have always thought that was backward. Cash is not the absence of conviction. Very often it is conviction in its purest form. It is the belief that terms matter. It is the belief that you do not have to buy when the crowd is buying. It is the belief that wonderful assets become more available when other people lose the luxury of choosing when to sell. That is why I have kept large amounts of cash or cash, like reserves through many cycles. Not because I enjoy watching money sit still, because cash is dry powder, and dry powder is what turns fear in other people into opportunity for you. Most families experience recessions as a shrinking of life. The reason is simple. They have no liquidity, no cushion, no way to absorb a shock without converting it immediately into debt, humiliation, or forced selling. That is why I call liquidity a psychological asset as much as a financial one. The man with 6 months of real runway does not think like the man with 6 days of panic. He is calmer, he sees more, he negotiates better, he is less easily bullied by urgent conditions, he can say no, he can wait, he can distinguish a temporary disturbance from a permanent wound. That clarity alone is worth a fortune. I have always found it remarkable that people will debate market outlooks, Fed policy, housing, elections, inflation, and every other grand topic, while never asking the simplest and most powerful question in their own life. If your income stopped tomorrow, how long could you last? Not emotionally, mathematically. If the answer is a few weeks, you are not really investing yet. You are still in survival, and survival mode makes intelligent investing almost impossible. This is why I tell people that the emergency reserve is not a side topic. It is not a good little saver topic. It is the foundation of adult financial freedom. If you do not have a real cash cushion, a recession is not merely a recession. It is a personal hostage situation. Every choice narrows. Every bill becomes louder. Every bad boss becomes harder to leave. Every market decline becomes more dangerous because your capital might need to become spending money at exactly the wrong time. That is what liquidity protects you from. It protects your choices from turning desperate. And desperation is where wealth gets transferred away from ordinary people. That is the second thing I want you to see. Clearly, debt is not a line on a statement. Debt is borrowed labor from your future. Every dollar you owe is work you have not yet done. That is what debt really is. The statement looks clean and administrative. It makes the whole arrangement feel civilized. Minimum payment due, interest rate here, promotional language there, all very neat. But underneath the neatness is a brutal truth. You already consumed something, and now your future effort has been pledged to pay for it. If the debt was used wisely, carefully, on productive terms, that can be rational. If the debt was used to decorate the present, then your future has already been sold at a discount. That is why I have so little patience for casual consumer debt. A $4,000 credit card balance at 22% interest is not just $4,000. It is a machine working against you every day, compounding in reverse. People admire compound interest when it works for them and ignore it when it works against them. But compound interest has no moral preference. It multiplies whatever you feed into it. If you feed it productive capital, it rewards you. If you feed it debt, it hunts you. That is why I say the debt accelerator is one of the great hidden destroyers of ordinary lives. It is quiet enough to go unnoticed and powerful enough to rewrite a decade. A recession makes this much worse because recessions do not send your debt a memo. Income may fall, hours may shrink. A client may disappear, a job may vanish, a business may stall, but the debt continues with full discipline, same rate, same calendar, same appetite. This is how a tough season becomes a spiral, and this is why people who come through recessions strongest are usually the ones who went into them lean. Not because they earned the most, because they owed the least. Less obligation means more thought. More thought means better decisions. Better decisions are what get rewarded when the crowd is becoming more emotional by the hour. Now, I want to talk about something that almost no financial advice describes properly, and yet it sits at the center of why so many people who earn good money still never build lasting wealth. I call it the consumption identity. At first, it sounds like a small psychological point. It is not. It may be the most expensive emotional habit in the country. Here is how it works. At some point, people stop buying things for use and start buying them for self-definition. The car no longer just transports. The apartment no longer just shelters. The watch no longer just tells time. The vacation no longer just restores. Everything becomes a small declaration of who you are, what level you occupy, how well you are doing, whether your life is on the right track, whether other people should regard you as successful. Once purchases become identity, cutting back stops feeling like prudence. It starts feeling like personal diminishment. And that is where many lives quietly break. A person gets a raise and it disappears before it arrives, not because he is foolish in some cartoon way, but because the new income instantly gets recruited into maintaining a more expensive version of the self. The bigger apartment, the upgraded social habits, the nicer car, the little lifestyle signals that say, I am rising. I understand the temptation. I am not above human nature, but I also know this. Lifestyle is a cost. That is all it is financially. A cost wealth is what remains after the costs are paid. So when people tell me they are doing well because they live well, I do not ask how their kitchen looks. I ask what happens if the income softens. I ask how much of the identity must be financed. I ask how many expenses would survive an ugly quarter. I ask whether the self they built can survive without the spending required to display it. That is a much more honest conversation. I have lived in the same house since 1958. I paid $31,500 for it. I eat simple breakfasts. I drive modest cars. Some people interpret this as eccentricity. I interpret it as independence. When your identity is not tied to possessions, recessions have far fewer places to hurt you. That is not trivial. If you stripped away the apartment, the car, the clothes, the devices, the symbolic upgrades, the consumption rituals that now tell you who you are, would you still know who you were? That question is worth far more than most financial products, because people who need consumption to stabilize identity are usually very easy to destabilize financially. The recession does not merely threaten their budget, it threatens their self-concept. And when a financial event becomes an identity event, the decisions that follow are usually very poor. That is why I tell people to separate dignity from display as early as they can. The person who can do that is much harder to injure. Now let us move to something even more practical. I have never trusted willpower as a long-term financial strategy. I do not mean that discipline does not matter. I mean that discipline built on daily heroics is too fragile for real life. People get tired. People get stressed. People get lonely, tempted, distracted, embarrassed, proud, resentful, impulsive, bored. That is normal. So if your entire financial future depends on your ability to wake up every payday and make perfect decisions in real time while advertisements, peers, fatigue, and insecurity all vote against you, then you have built a system that is too kind to your weaknesses. I prefer systems that are kind to your future. That means environment architecture. The money moves before you touch it. Savings are automated. Investments are automated. The good choice is the default. The bad choice requires extra effort. This matters more than people think because human beings adapt to what remains. If your paycheck hits checking and then you intend to save whatever is left after life happens, life will take the larger share. It always finds reasons. If the savings move first, you build your life around what remains. That is not a trick. It is design. and design beats intention over long periods. Your human environment matters too. The people around you train your financial behavior more than your theories do. If the people nearest you spend everything normalize debt, use shopping as self-medication, and treat future planning as some joyless personality defect, you will absorb that atmosphere whether you mean to or not. If the people around you think long, speak calmly about money, admire restraint instead of display, and talk about building rather than spending, that affects you just as deeply. Humans mirror. They always have. This is why mentors matter, why communities matter, why your chosen environment matters. You cannot outsource your entire future to willpower while swimming daily in a culture organized around impatience. Design the environment, then let the environment do part of the work. Now I want to talk about something newer, uglier, and in some ways more dangerous than all the older problems. The attention economy tax. This is the invisible tax most people pay every day without ever seeing the bill. Every app, every network, every alert, every channel, every headline, every outrage machine profits, not from your financial well-being, but from your attention. And fear captures attention more reliably than calm. This means modern people do not merely face market volatility. They face a media ecosystem designed to convert volatility into emotional urgency, whether or not the urgency is useful. That is a disastrous combination for investors. Because wealth is built through clear thinking, and clear thinking requires a level of stillness that the modern attention economy is designed to erode. When recessions come, the noise gets deafening, predictions become more theatrical. Everyone starts narrating the moment in extreme language, and ordinary people react. They sell when fear feels like intelligence. They freeze when clarity is required. They chase stories. They abandon plans. They mistake constant information consumption for preparedness. It is not preparedness. It is often just agitation. Some of the best financial decisions of my life were made in quiet rooms, not in loud ones. I asked simple questions. What is this business actually worth? What is the balance sheet? What survives? What is the cash flow likely to be in 10 years? What is fear distorting right now? Those questions are harder to ask when your mind is being taxed every hour by urgency merchants. That is why I say clear thinking is one of the most valuable assets in a recession, more valuable than tips, more valuable than fashionable macro opinions, more valuable even than many forms of analysis, because analysis without clarity often becomes sophisticated noise. Now let me put all of this into the order that matters. If you see the full picture, honestly, what should you actually do? The first step is awareness. This is the part almost nobody enjoys because it forces them out of the emotional generalities they have been living inside. You need the full picture, every fixed monthly cost, every debt, every balance, every interest rate, every automatic charge, every area where spending and identity got tangled together, every place where optimism has been financing normal life. Then ask yourself the most adult question in the room. If my income stopped tomorrow, how many months could I last? If the answer is less than 6 months, then you are not yet ready for the second step. Not because you are failing morally, because the structure is not ready. Your priority is liquidity. That means build the 6-month cushion first. Not theory cash. Real money, not heroic speculation. Not pretending the next investment opportunity is more urgent than basic survival. The cushion buys time. Time buys thought. Thought buys good decisions. Good decisions are what turn recessions from personal disasters into economic opportunities. The second step is control. Once you have awareness, you build systems, automate savings, automate investing, remove friction from the right behaviors, add friction to the wrong ones. Attack the highest interest debt first, because that is where the leak is strongest. Stop treating minimum payments as evidence that the debt is under control. Debt is under control when it is shrinking fast enough that your future is being released, not when the statement says thank you for another month of obedience. Control also means telling the truth about spending linked to identity. If your lifestyle is a costume, you must keep funding to feel okay. That is not freedom. That is rented self-esteem. Cut that dependency. The third step is growth. This is where most people want to begin, and that is why most people are late. The growth stage only becomes powerful if the earlier structure exists. Once the cushion is there, once the expensive debt is being strangled instead of fed, once the system is automated, once you can think without immediate panic, then falling markets look different. They stop looking only like danger. They begin looking like terms. A recession is one of the only times in economic life when good things can be bought at prices set more by other people's need for cash than by long-term worth. That is where fortunes widen. Not because the recession magically creates value, because it reprices fear. The person who prepared sees that. The person who did not prepare can only watch. That is one of the most painful divides in economic life. Same country, same downturn, same market. One person is finally buying. The other is trying not to drown. The fourth step is freedom. This is the step people forget while claiming to care about money. Money is not the point. Freedom is the point. Money is one tool among a few for building the kind of life where your choices are not ruled by immediate necessity. The point is not to worship balances. The point is to build a life where your systems work. Your obligations are light enough to think clearly. Your future is not constantly mortgaged to the present, and a recession feels like a change in weather rather than a judgment on your whole existence. That kind of freedom is built slowly, one clear choice at a time. Now let me bring all of this together. We talked about the liquidity trap. A life can look affluent while being structurally weak. The person with growing income but no real cushion is not secure. He is merely exposed at a higher lifestyle level. We talked about the debt accelerator. Interest compounds either for you or against you. If it is against you, you are financing someone else's comfort with your future effort. We talked about the consumption identity. Possessions are dangerous when they become emotional support systems. We talked about environment architecture. Willpower is weak compared with well-designed systems. We talked about the attention economy tax. Noise steals clarity, and clarity is precious during bad economic periods. Then we moved from idea to sequence. Awareness, control, growth, freedom. This is not a motivational poster. It is a machine. And what most people never grasp is that the machine must be built before the storm looks socially undeniable. By the time the recession feels obvious, your true position inside it is often already decided. That is why I am not nervous. Nervous is for people who waited for urgency before beginning. I prefer readiness. Readiness is quieter, it feels less dramatic, it gets mocked in booms and admired in busts. That is fine. I have never needed the crowd. Emotional permission to do what arithmetic clearly required. And arithmetic clearly requires this. If you want to come through 2026 stronger, do not begin by asking what stock to buy. Begin by asking whether your life can survive a shock without becoming stupid. That is the better question. Build the cushion, kill the expensive debt, separate dignity from display, automate good behavior, reduce the tax of noise. Then, when fear finally reaches the market in a form that makes good assets available on bad emotional terms, you will be able to act instead of merely react. That is what separates the people who harvest during recessions from the people who are simply harvested by them. And that difference is not luck, it is preparation. Start today, not because the calendar says recession, because your future has always needed this structure, whether the recession comes on schedule or not.